Imagine being betrayed by the one person you thought would always have your back, your own sibling. Picture saving your whole life, or waiting for what was rightfully yours, only to discover that your brother swooped in and stole your inheritance before you even had a chance to touch it. Most people would crumble under that kind of betrayal, but this story takes a shocking twist. Because while he thought he had one, greed has a way of digging its own grave. And in this case, it left him with absolutely nothing. I grew up in what most people would call an ordinary family. My parents worked hard their whole lives, building a modest but comfortable home where my brother and I were raised. When my father passed away, it wasn't just his absence that weighed heavily on us, it was the responsibility of his estate. He had been careful, leaving behind a will that made things seem simple. Everything he owned, including some savings and property, would be split equally between my brother and me. On paper, it sounded fair. At the time, I was just trying to stay afloat. Life hadn't been easy, bills piled up, opportunities felt scarce, but knowing I had some financial support coming gave me hope for a fresh start. My brother, however, had always been different. Ambitious, driven, but also entitled, he believed the world owed him more than it gave. Where I valued fairness and balance, he craved power and control. Still, our parents always believed we would respect each other and honor their wishes, no matter what. For a while, everything looked smooth on the surface. But sometimes betrayal doesn't arrive with a warning, it waits quietly, hidden beneath a smile, until the moment it strikes. It wasn't long before I realized that what seemed like a straightforward process was anything but. My brother had moved quickly after my father's passing, quietly meeting with the lawyer who handled the will. At first, I thought he was simply being responsible, taking care of paperwork. But later, I discovered the truth. He had manipulated the situation behind my back. Whether it was through charm, pressure, or outright deceit, he managed to shift assets in his favor. Important documents were suddenly missing, and when questions were raised, he painted me as irresponsible and undeserving. By the time I caught on, it was already too late. The inheritance that was meant to be shared had slipped entirely into his hands. The shock left me paralyzed. It wasn't just about the money, though I desperately needed it, it was about trust. To be robbed by strangers is one thing, but to be betrayed by your own blood is another wound altogether. My brother wasted no time flaunting his new life. Within weeks, he was driving a sleek new car, posting pictures from expensive restaurants, and boasting about a house he had no right to call his own. Relatives noticed, of course. Some whispered that I must have been careless, while others stayed silent, unwilling to get involved. I felt humiliated, powerless, and abandoned, as if the ground beneath me had been pulled away. The bond between us, once fragile, was now shattered beyond repair. In the weeks that followed, I tried to pick up the pieces and move on, though every step felt heavier knowing what had been stolen from me. Bills kept piling up, and I worked longer hours just to keep my head above water. Meanwhile, my brother seemed to revel in my struggle. He carried himself with a smug arrogance, treating me as if I were a failure who couldn't manage life on my own. At family gatherings, his presence turned the air thick with tension. He would boast loudly about his new purchases, while I forced polite smiles, swallowing the bitterness that burned inside me. Some relatives looked at me with pity, others avoided eye contact altogether, unwilling to confront the ugly truth. On the surface, my brother's life appeared flawless, lavish dinners, endless shopping sprees, and nights out with new friends who circled him like vultures. But I started to notice small cracks. He spent recklessly, buying things he didn't need, surrounding himself with people who seemed to care more about his wallet than his well-being. Whispers about his gambling and questionable deals trickled back to me. I couldn't help but think, money gained through betrayal doesn't last forever. His downfall, I felt, was already in motion. At first, my brother's life looked like the picture of success. He poured a large portion of the inheritance into what he called a promising business venture, though in reality, it was nothing more than a risky scheme pitched by smooth-talking acquaintances. He surrounded himself with people who praised his every move, but it was clear they weren't there for him, they were there for his money. Nights out turned into endless parties, spontaneous vacations became routine, and luxury cars appeared in his driveway like trophies he barely had time to drive. But extravagance has a price. Debt began to creep in, quietly at first, then louder, until it couldn't be ignored. Creditors called, payments slipped, and whispers started circulating about his poor financial choices. I watched from a distance, still carrying the sting of betrayal, yet strangely detached. It wasn't satisfaction I felt, it was more like witnessing an inevitable storm roll in. The first blow came when his big business project collapsed. Lawsuits followed, draining him of both money and credibility. Yet he refused to admit the reality, doubling down on reckless spending as if denial could shield him from the truth. One by one, the symbols of his wealth began to vanish. Cars were sold, luxury items pawned, and eventually even his prized home slipped through his fingers. From the outside, it was painful to watch, though part of me couldn't help reflecting on the irony. Greed had blinded him so completely that he couldn't see what was happening until everything was gone. The very inheritance he stole to build a future had become the foundation of his downfall. The final blow came harder than anyone expected. My brother had stretched himself too thin, making promises he couldn't keep, and eventually, the law caught up with him. A lawsuit from one of his failed business partners drained whatever scraps of money he had left, and soon after, the bank repossessed his house. The luxury cars, the designer clothes, even the expensive watch he used to flash at family dinners, gone. One by one, the symbols of his stolen success vanished, leaving him with nothing but debts and a tarnished name. What made it worse was the betrayal of those he once called friends. The same people who had praised him and enjoyed his generosity disappeared the moment his money ran dry. Suddenly, the man who had strutted so proudly was standing alone, humiliated and exposed. His reputation, once inflated by arrogance and flashy spending, crumbled to dust. Relatives whispered behind closed doors, some shaking their heads in pity, others admitting he had gotten exactly what he deserved. For me, it was a strange mixture of emotions. I didn't celebrate his downfall, but I couldn't ignore the poetic justice. The inheritance he stole, money that could have secured both our futures, was wasted in the most ironic way possible. It didn't make him stronger or more successful. It destroyed him. Meanwhile, my life, though modest, remained steady. I paid my bills, worked hard, and found small comforts in knowing I had earned everything honestly. I never had to lift a finger or seek revenge. Karma had done all the work, and it was far more satisfying than anything I could have planned. Looking back, I realized the betrayal that once crushed me had, in its own way, shaped me. I learned to survive without the inheritance I was promised, pushing myself to work harder, build stability, and find peace and resilience. It wasn't easy, but over time, I discovered that true wealth has little to do with money. It's about freedom, integrity, and the lessons life carves into us when we're forced to stand on our own. When my brother's downfall became clear to everyone, I didn't feel the need to gloat. There was no satisfaction in watching him crumble, only relief that justice had played out naturally. Greed had been his undoing, while patience and honesty carried me forward. In the end, he was left with nothing but the weight of his own choices. And me? I walked away stronger, determined never to let betrayal define me, but to let it teach me instead. Greed has a way of catching up, no matter how clever someone thinks they are. My brother believed he had outsmarted me, but in reality, he had only set the stage for his own downfall. Losing everything wasn't just about the money, it was about the trust, the respect, and the family bonds he destroyed in the process. In the end, his betrayal didn't break me. Instead, it taught me that justice sometimes doesn't come through revenge, but through watching karma do exactly what it does best.